All right, so the second video for the second section of the application form here, we're going to start to look at the data and the managing of the data in your project. The first set of questions here is really asking, are you doing secondary analysis on either data that's already been collected, either by yourself or someone else, or accessing other types of information that you are going to be treating as data. So it wasn't data that was collected initially for research purposes. So we want to know these different things. I'll note that if you answer yes to the second question there, you're using a data repository, or you're getting data from a data repository. We may have some follow-up questions about that in terms of the security of that data and that sort of thing. So all right, so if you answer yes to any of those, please describe the nature of that data. So if the first question, previously collected for purposes other than research, so just say, briefly, it's, aggregate course marks from, this class for the past 5 years or something like that. So there's that. And then also if you answer yes to any of those questions, there's another set of questions to answer. And this is just getting at kind of the nature of the data. Is it anonymized data and therefore secure? Do you have permission to access the data if it's not you that previously created the records or the data? And whether or not the data is publicly available. In some cases, if data is publicly available, additional safeguards do not need to be in place in terms of, for example, getting participant consent to use the data, particularly if it's anonymized and publicly available. So that's why we ask those sorts of questions. All right, the next section is secure storage of data. So during the data collection and analysis, and even including if you are, for example, getting data from a data repository, we still want to know how you are securing that data while you are doing your study. So this is an enhanced question. We've always asked this question, but we've enhanced this in that we've given you prompts about the things that we want to hear about for the ethics review. So address all of these items here. And so we want to make sure that the data is stored in a secure way, limited access to it. Want to look at if you're collecting personally identifiable information, how you're going to separate that out and when. And if you're transferring data either from site to site or between co-researchers, we want to make sure that you've got good, secure processes in place. And in all of that too, particularly, for example, encrypting data and that sort of thing, any IT specific questions, the Research Common at Red Deer Polytechnic, as well as IT services, are more than happy to help you out with any questions and tools and advice for securing digital data in that way. We've added in a question here about, or a prompt here about backups for your data. And so it's not necessarily an ethical requirement that you have backups for your data, but it's a good research practice, good research data management practice. And so again, the Research Common would be a really good resource for that, to get some of the advice behind backing up data. I'll just let you know the rule for backup is those people who think about research data management at RDP recommend the 3-2-1 backup strategy, and that's where you have 3 copies of your data stored on two different media or formats. So digital and print would be, sort of a simple way to have 2 different storage media. And then one of those 3 copies is stored off-site or in a completely different site than the other 2 there. So if you are practicing good data management techniques, where are we? Okay, there we go. And we would just like to know that storage of that data. And what we do and we look for, particularly if you have very sensitive, very personal data records, and we'll be looking for making sure that all places that data is being stored is secure. So that's during the data collection, data analysis process. In addition to those questions, if you're using either an online survey tool or an online meeting tool, we have a couple of other data security questions that we would like you to answer for this application form. And they're very similar and with one little difference here. But essentially for both, if you're using an online survey tool or using, for example, Teams to conduct interviews, we want to know what the tool is, although you've already identified that earlier, but we want to know the tool, but also where the servers and where the data that's recorded in those tools is being served. So this is where you'll need to go to and be familiar with the tool that you're using and whether it's an American or Canadian company or elsewhere and where their servers are located. And that has implications, as you can see this little footnote here, that asterisks here. If the servers are located in the U.S., that has implications for the security of that data due to laws, particularly the U.S. Patriot Act in the U.S. That means that data stored on servers, U.S. servers, can be accessed by the government or their representatives, and so that poses a particular risk for security of that data. You as a researcher don't have really any control over that, and that can also occur even if a tool is owned by a Canadian company. In some cases, their servers are also located in the US, so that would also apply in those cases. So information about the tool is easily accessible, so we want you to locate that information because that's also information you need to identify to your participants in the informed consent process as it poses a particular risk, for privacy, and they need to be informed of that for true informed consent in the project. With both online survey tool and meeting tools, you at some point will likely be taking the data from that tool and putting on your own device or digital space. So we want you to articulate that process for that transfer and getting it off of the server tool and into another location and where it'll be located. Best recommendation we have for that is to utilize our institutional accounts and servers and storage spaces via Microsoft Office 365 currently here at RDP. That's the most secure place to be storing research data. All right, so we'll just stick up with the online survey. With the online survey, we also want to know if you're collecting any personal information. So often, and actually increasingly, and we'll get to this a little bit later, IP addresses, you might collect that as a function of the tool. It's an option that you set up. Contact information for incentives, that sort of thing. So if you're collecting that information, we want to know how you're going to be detaching that information and keeping it separate from the survey responses and the data that your participants provide. With online meetings, the additional information we want to know is description of the transcription process. So are you going to be transcribing digitally recorded interviews or focus groups video recorded there? If you are going to be transcribing them, is it going to be done by person? Are you going to use an online tool or service? And just provide us those particular details, but also how you're going to be keeping those things secure. So that is that. So we're still in secure storage of data, and we do have this follow-up and very similar questions, but we want to know after the completion of the project, your plans for the storage of the research data. So this is just the research data, and it's just, as you can see, similar questions. Where will you store the data? And this is after the research, after the completion of the project. So this is, you've done the research, you've analyzed it, you're writing reports, you're writing journal articles, you're giving conference presentations, you're doing what you said you do with the data. And you're really not doing anything more with the data. And that's considered to be the completion of the project. And so it is common practice, and it is actually an advisable, recommended, and a recommended practice to keep your data for a period of time afterwards. Many different reasons for that. One, couple are, you may want to come back to it, and, you continue to study in this particular research in this particular area, and maybe you do sort of a comparison, a few years down the road. Someone else might want your data, either to, replicate studies, or, in some cases, maybe even challenge your analysis and your results. So they may request access to that. And I have it down here, the guidelines for responsible conduct of research, which is a national policy that Canadian researchers are bound by. Those guidelines recommend keeping the data in as a way to be able to defend yourself against any accusations of misconduct in conducting research. So if you have your data and those accusations or challenges come forward, you have something to back your work up. And so those are the main different reasons. So it's not an obligation, and it's not a requirement that you destroy your data after, any period of time, really. If the data is stored, is securely stored, you can keep that data for as long as you'd like. But space saving, that sort of stuff, you may wish to create a retention period and a rationale for that. So we want to know that retention period. We want to know how long you're going to keep it and why. And as I've just sort of alluded to a little bit here, this asterisk here, retention periods may be driven by the discipline you're in, the research purpose, the kind of data that's involved. If you have funding, there may be some funder requirements for that, and so forth. So we can't, the ethics board can't advise on what that period is, and we just want you to show the thinking on what you're going to be doing for how long you'll be storing that data. And so the other thing here, data repositories, I think is the next question. Yeah, so the next question is data repositories. And in that particular case, if you're depositing your data into a data repository, you technically are not destroying your data. And so this, so this question, the retention period, should reflect that information there. Okay, so let's go into that data repository information as our last section here. So data sharing, data repositories. So this question is related to the data. This is not the dissemination. So you'll be sharing the results of your study, and that what you're sharing is your analysis, your themes, your conclusions, your observations. And that's all, that's a separate, as you saw, we looked at that earlier. Data sharing and data repositories is where you're sharing your raw data. You're sharing your data sets, or, the transcripts from interviews, your anonymized transcripts from interviews, and so forth. And so data sharing can occur, just amongst researchers. They, you could, for example, join up to a larger research project and bring your data with you, or just share it with another researcher. Data repositories are formal data, digital repositories that are becoming much more, common, and in some cases required. There are sometimes some funding and even some publishing requirements where researchers are obligated to put their data into a data repository. And so if either of these or both apply, we want to know sort of those details there. And if you do say that you are going to be, putting your data into a data repository, we will very likely have some follow-up questions, because there are some additional ethical questions that need to be considered when choosing and doing that to ensure that the data is secure in that case. So there will be some follow-up questions. Don't worry, it won't be too onerous. And if you are already thinking and knowing that you're going to be doing a data repository process, you likely will already, these questions should be fairly straightforward. All right, so that's the last section of section 2, and we'll do another video with, it looks like we get to participants. Great.